So with whitetail season right around the corner, I wanted to do a video talking about specifically where to aim on a whitetail deer with a bow. Hopefully after this video, you can take away a few tidbits that will help you increase your harvest rate this season. So if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe before we get too deep into the video. Bow hunting for about 13 years and I made every single mistake there is to make in the book. And that's the only reason I feel qualified to even talk about where to aim on a whitetail deer, is because if you see a bad example or a shot that I say that's less than ideal, it's probably because I've had personal experience. And over the last 5 years of filming my hunts, I have close to 50 bow kill shots on video, and we're gonna be overlaying those as we're talking about shot placement. In the video today, we wanna do 3 things. I wanna show you guys how I aim on a whitetail deer to be the most lethal in my experience. 2, I wanna talk about aiming on different shot angles. So whether that be quartering away or quartering to, and how that can change your aiming point based on the exit of your arrow. I'm also gonna touch on how you should maybe aim a little bit differently based on a fixed versus expandable broadhead choice, or a heavy versus a light arrow. We're not gonna get too deep into that topic, but I think there is a little bit to consider when aiming on a deer. So with that, let's get right into it. Let's dive into how I aim on a deer with a bow. So I pulled up the Drury Outdoors DeerCast app because they have a really cool deer tracking layer on here. You can toggle back and forth between with hide on and then kind of hide removed, which kind of gives you a better look at all the anatomical features, the lungs, the heart, the arteries, the different veins that run throughout the deer. So like many of you, I grew up rifle hunting, and how I was taught how to aim on a whitetail deer was right up the middle of this front leg and about midway up the body, which with a rifle is a fantastic shot. I'd argue with a bow, it's a great shot too. So when you take away the hide, you realize that that sits right within that vital V, this crease of the leg bone coming up and meeting the shoulder blade, creates this kind of V, and it's got all the juicy goodness that you want in shot placement. It's got the heart, all the arteries and veins that come off the heart, and both lungs right there in close proximity. But one of the issues that you're gonna run into when you're hunting with a bow is, I've seen it anywhere from 15 yards out to 45 yards even and further. Deer tend to react with a bow. They typically only go one direction, and that's usually down. It's not if deer drop, it's how much. Some of them might flinch just a little bit. There's been very few instances where a few just stone cold sit there and take it, but most of the time, I'd say 95% of the time, you're gonna see some sort of drop on a deer, which with a bow changes your aiming point. I hear a lot of folks saying when they wanna aim on a whitetail deer, they go for lower 1/3 and right up that front leg. And when you take away the hide, you realize why that's such deadly shot placement on a whitetail. Like I said earlier, everything is there. You got the lungs, the arteries, the veins, the heart. I mean, there's legitimately a shot right here where if you hit it right in line with that leg, 1/3 of the way up, you can hit lungs and heart in the same shot, which is absolutely devastating. But what I try to do is pretty much just that when I'm aiming on a whitetail. You know, depending on the distance, I might aim a little bit lower, but I'm typically always aiming just probably 4 to 5 inches above the belly line, right in line with that front leg. And the reason for that is if I shoot for the heart and say I get 3 to 4 inches of duck, I'm still easily in a double lung situation with the right kind of penetration. So duck is something I think you have to anticipate with a bow. That's not something you ever have to really worry about with a rifle. It plays a significant play. I've seen bucks at 30 yards duck 8 to 10 inches, and it's absolutely amazing, and it happens so quick. If you were to just see the shot, you would think that you just shot high, but then you slow it down and you realize as soon as that sound, the speed of sound reaches the deer, because the speed of sound is way faster than the speed of your bow. So the deer are gonna hear your bow before the arrow actually gets there. That's really something you gotta worry about with a bow. The only way that I've found to kind of mitigate the risk is to just bring that sight picture a little bit lower, and I just typically aim low and I hold low. That's just my experience. Sometimes the deer don't move, but in most situations I feel like they do, and it just ends up for a much more lethal shot. All right, so with that being said, let's move into section number 2. We're gonna talk about where to aim based on your broadhead and your arrow. Heavy arrow, fixed blade, heavy arrow, mechanical. There's a lot of different configurations. Light arrow, fixed blade, light arrow, mechanical. So I'm just gonna generalize, and I'm gonna keep this in basically 2 camps, fixed versus expandable, just for the sake of this video, and talk about maybe how I would consider aiming a little bit differently depending on what I was shooting. So up until about 2 years ago, so for the first 11 years that I bow hunted, I shot pretty much exclusively mechanical. One, just because they flow the best out of my bow. I had no experience at all with tuning or taking stuff to shops, and I shot Walmart arrows that were not just cheap carbon expresses, that were not tuned, they were not cut to my right distance. I wasn't even shooting the right draw length. So everything about my setup was pretty messed up. And previously speaking, I would have told you it is better to be right in here, about 2 inches behind the shoulder or behind the leg, because when you look at it on the anatomical view, the lungs are right there. So you miss a little bit back, you're still hitting the lungs. You miss a little bit forward, you're hitting the lungs, and possibly getting into some of those arteries and veins that come off the heart. But what I noticed with those shots is if you creep back, if there's any angle, you have a little bit more likelihood of hitting the back lobes of the lungs and the liver. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to talk about the different lobes of the lungs, even though they are there, and some are more effective at killing a deer than others. But this back shot, away from that shoulder, to me definitely puts deer down, but not as good as if I were to creep in here closer in that vital V, where you see all the goodies come together. So previously speaking, I would have put a shot about back here. In the last 2 or 3 years, I've been putting it a lot more, hugging a lot more close to that shoulder, because as you can see, the heart, lungs, veins, arteries, all of them come together right there. So with a mechanical, I can tell you one thing: mechanicals and scapulas don't mix. So that was my thoughts exactly, were, hey, if I'm gonna be shooting a mechanical broadhead, I wanna stay away from that shoulder. If you're extremely confident in your accuracy and you can put it and pinpoint it exactly where you're shooting every single time, maybe you do hug that shoulder a little bit more, but the animal does have a vote. When you're picking an arrow and you're picking a broadhead, that's just something you have to consider. I would say shoot the deer in the right spot no matter what you're shooting and deal with the consequences. But the reality is, if you hit this deer in the back of the lungs or the liver, yeah, you're probably gonna find it. It's not gonna be the best day though. It's gonna take a little bit longer to die. It's gonna be a little more agonizing, and it's obviously not the best shot. If you are shooting a fixed blade with a heavy arrow, which is what I'm doing now, I've been shooting, I think, a 540 grain arrow the last 2 years, which is significantly heavier than I used to shoot. But I'm a long draw length. I have 31-inch draw length, so it's hard for me to shoot a light arrow. But I've been shooting a 540 for the last 2 years, and I think my setup going into this season is around 585. With this, and I switched from a 3-blade broadhead to a single bevel, which gives me the utmost confidence to not hug the shoulder, but get right in that vital V, right there where all the goodies are coming together. And like I said before, regardless of broadhead, regardless of arrow, I'm aiming lower 1/3, right up that leg, and shooting for heart. We always say shoot for heart, settle for lungs, and that's what I'm going to be doing in these situations too. So I think one of the important things is just being honest with yourself and saying, how proficient am I with my equipment? How good can I command an arrow at 20 or 25 yards? If shot placement is the king, I would say shot selection is the queen. And knowing your limitation is really big when it comes to shot placement and where to aim, because the further you get out, if you're getting past distances that you don't feel comfortable at or distances that you don't typically practice at, it doesn't really matter, you know, where your aim starts to become a little less relevant because you're going to be all over the place. So I would say know your limits and stick to them. That way when you do pick a certain spot to aim on the deer, you have a higher likelihood of hitting it. Take everything with a grain of salt. There's not a single shot that's ever happened on a deer that I think has happened exactly the same way again. You know, whether it's a little bit of an angle change or a little bit of a distance change. I mean, I've shot mechanical broadheads at broadside deer at 25 yards, cut through them like butter. I shot a funky buck 25 yards a couple years ago with a Swacker 261, that Levi Morgan edition. Cut through him, probably the best shot placement I've ever put on a deer. Cut right through him, heart, lungs. You can see as the arrow is going out the other side, he's already spraying out both sides. Just beautiful shot placement, put him down in 20 yards. And I've had situations with fixed blade broadheads where I've been broadside and I didn't penetrate worth a crap. Not every situation is the same. You really got to get confidence on where to aim, on actually doing it on deer. This is just kind of a general guide. With that, let's move into shot angles, which could be its complete separate video. So I'm just gonna briefly talk about this, talk about quartering to and quartering away shots and kind of how that can change your aiming point with a bow. On this buck right here, you can see that he's quartering to. This is a classic angle in deer hunting. Especially, it seems like when you spook one, they just end up sitting there giving you this go to hell stare and quartering to you. So if you took your typical aiming point like we were talking about earlier, you know, right up that leg, lower 1/3, you're not considering where the shot is gonna hit, you're thinking about where is the arrow gonna exit. So I want that arrow to come out right in front of that back hip, which means I'm gonna put my shot placement, some people would put it right here by the neck. I'm gonna put it right here near that front shoulder blade, which I'm shooting an arrow system that I feel confident shooting near or at shoulder blades with, but I'm gonna put it right here on the deer, expecting that arrow to penetrate all the way through and go out right out the back hip. I had a situation like this happen to me last year in Kansas where I had a deer pretty much at this quartering angle, which is a pretty hard angle, quartering to. And I came in at 25 yards. I put it right on his front shoulder and with a 3-blade Thunderhead, went right behind the shoulder and went coast to coast out the back hip, full pass through, got one lung, liver, guts, everything on that arrow. The deer ran 60 yards and piled up. So the quartering to is a very effective shot angle if you know where to aim. And depending on how hard quartered he would be, the less quartered, the more likely I'd be to put it closer to behind the shoulder. The more quartered, the more I'm starting to creep to the front of the shoulder blade, or even right here kind of in the pocket in between the shoulder and the neck. And one thing I would say about broadheads here is I would be very hesitant to take the shot with a mechanical. I'm a slightly quartering to shot with a mechanical I'd feel comfortable doing, you know, right in the Vital V, but anything that starts to bring this front shoulder blade, as we can see on the deer cast here, as this deer quarters to you, what's gonna happen is this front shoulder blade is gonna come more into play. And the more you bring that into play with that quartering angle, the less likely that I'm gonna be shooting that with a mechanical broadhead. When you choose your equipment, you have to understand what the trade-offs are. If you want a huge cutting diameter and maybe the highest likelihood for nasty blood trails, you know, you'd be going with a mechanical. But it does have its trade-off in some of the quartering angles, which you can see here. With that, let's talk about the quartering away angle. I would love to have a 200-inch muley like this quartering away from me. But you can see here that there's a reference or an aiming point on this mule deer right here, which I personally think is the wrong one. I've seen a shot angle like this before. I shot a doe on public land one year that was quartering away like this, and I basically made this exact same shot where this red dot is. And what happened was I was shooting mechanical that day and hit that doe right there, and what happens is you have this kind of skip factor when a deer is on a hard quartering away angle, or even a quartering away angle at all, that if the tip doesn't get a good bite to get into that rib cage, what it can do is encounter the rib cage and then slide all the way up out the brisket, which is exactly what happened on this doe. I hit her pretty much in this exact same spot, and it skid all the way up the ribs and came right out in front of the brisket, right in the brisket on the front. And that deer ended up losing enough blood to die, but I never even got into her cavity, which was absolutely crazy when you think about it. The only thing that I would change here on this shot angle I would be likely to bring it a little bit higher, and then I would probably bring it 4 to 5 inches back, because you can see in this picture, you can see that opposite leg coming up, and that's one of your points of reference. So that opposite shoulder is probably gonna go something like right here, especially on a big old mule deer. So when you're shooting at this quartering away angle, you wanna bring your aiming point back. That way when you shoot, the arrow is going to exit either pinning in that offside shoulder or right out behind that offside shoulder, or it wouldn't even be terrible, depending on where the hunter's oriented, to bring it even a little further back here if the hunter was to the right and not even with the deer, and go coast to coast, bringing it right out that brisket, all the way through the guts, all the way through the liver, lungs, and coming out the other end. This is, I would say, another drawback of the mechanical is here, what you have to worry about is shooting the guts of a deer, especially shooting them on a quartering angle, is pretty much like shooting a bag target. It's a bunch of linings just rolled over each other. You know, I'm sure in like 7th grade you were taught that, you know, you have 26 feet of guts inside you or something like that, or intestine, which really kind of freaked me out to think about it. But all that is compact, layered, and stacked on top of each other and kind of rolls around in these little S formations, which just kills arrow penetration. If you go into this deer season and you're anticipating a little bit of duck in these deer, some of them have paranoid schizophrenia, it seems like, so it's hard to kill them anyways. If you're aiming lower 1/3, bringing it right up that back leg, you're gonna be right there in all the goodies. And even when the deer ducks, you're still gonna be right there, double lung, cutting some major arteries and veins coming off the heart. So this is how I've learned to aim over 13 years of bow hunting, and aiming low, anticipating a little bit of duck, getting close in that vital V where all those goodies are, and shooting a good arrow setup with a reliable broadhead has helped me become more effective and increase my harvest rate over the last few years. Whether you've been having this debate with your buddy about where to aim on a deer, or you just think this would be helpful to someone else, make sure to like the video and share it with someone else that you think would enjoy it. I only share this with you guys because I've made every single one of the mistakes in the book. I've shot deer in the guts, I've shot them in the shoulder, I've shot them in the liver, the lungs, the heart, backstrapped them, spined them. I've done all of those things. Some are better than others, and I promise you, shooting a deer right in the heart and lungs, right near that vital V, it's gonna make for a short track job, and it's gonna make for a lot more enjoyable hunt. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, shoot the big one this year, and we will catch you guys in the next one.